anymore. My name is Eric Kinman. I'm president of the Solidarity Foundation. And it's a great pleasure to be here tonight at Drake University, my alma mater. I'll keep this short and sweet because the words I have to share are small in comparison to the knowledge sharing that will occur with our guest lecturer tonight. My name is Eric Kinman, as I said, and I operate the Solidarity Foundation, which was founded just about 12 months ago here in Des Moines. About 15 months ago, I came across a methodology called savings groups that facilitates financial inclusion and financial empowerment for vulnerable populations. Even though I had spent over 20 years in the financial services industry, and mind you, I was in credit unions, entities known for serving the underserved, I had no idea how low-income populations manage their money. And worse, I found almost none of my professional financial industry peers knew either. The savings group methodology, which Jeff will go into as he speaks, I came across it just by fluke. I was amazed by the simplicity of the methodology, and that was its success, because it did something most U.S. financial institutions and financial literacy practitioners rarely do. It was built from the perspective of the vulnerable populations it serves. Today, almost 12 million people worldwide use savings groups, which can be described as savings-based microfinance. But here in the U.S., us, well-intentioned financial inclusion practitioners and financial services professionals are unaware of this methodology, nor are they aware of the largely unseen financial management behaviors of the populations. Not only are 12 million individuals in savings groups right now globally, but we are now adapting this methodology here in the US. For us personally, 12 months ago, we started groups in Puerto Vallarta, around the city dump there. And since then, we've grown to have groups in Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico, more in Mexico, and now here in Des Moines. And I'm very, very pleased to say that about 30 minutes ago, we started a savings group with a group of Bhutanese refugees that are affiliated with Lutheran Services in Iowa, right here in Des Moines. So, with that, I'm going to turn this over to the gentleman who designed the methodology, and he can talk about the experiences and what led to this great breakthrough. Jeffrey?
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Eric. Well, this is also about financial institution building, but let me show you the financial institution we're talking about. The entire financial institution and everything is this box right here on the top of this woman's head. These members here are part of a savings group through a program that I started called Save for Change. So we'll get to it. Thank you. Now I would say, how many of you have heard of microfinance? Okay, quite a few. Well, I was one of the pioneers of microfinance back in the Pleistocene of microfinance back in 1980, 81, 82, and saw microfinance start from a small movement of just a few thousand people. Maybe should I be here closer to the microphone? Yeah, okay. To a few thousand people to a movement now that has grown to 200 million. So that's good. I was there, helped introduce the methodology to Acción International, one of the major players, and saw that going. And then I became disillusioned because microfinance was not reaching the very poor, although the hype was that it was reaching that population. And the stories that you so often hear of somebody receiving a tiny loan and suddenly being catapulted out of poverty, yes, indeed, were true, but for every 1 out of 500 or 1,000 people. And on average, microfinance was a wash, wasn't reaching the poor, and also serving this population through these huge financial institutions with their thousands of employees was expensive. So even though I helped start microfinance back in 1980, 81, did their initial work, by 2005, I was disillusioned because I heard more and more stories about people as microfinance spread People were taking out one loan to pay off the loan for another program, spiraling into debt. And the institutions, much like payday lenders here, were extorting, harassing people to pay back their loans, which were too large in the first place because the institutions wanted to maximize their profit by moving as much money as possible. So I was looking for an alternative. Unfortunately, I had evaluated a program in Burkina Faso, actually a credit union, a big credit union there that Eric Wagner that took the credit unions, which were reaching the middle class, and with that excess money that they had, moved that money down to groups of 20 or 30 very poor women. They were, so they, instead of giving out individual loans, they were giving out one loan about the same size to 30 people and paying that back. I said, this is an incredible methodology. Look how credit unions are now serving the very poor instead of the middle class. Then the next person stood up and she said, well, I represent an organization called PACT, and PACT has been working in the poorest part of Nepal for a year, and we have 6,500 groups with 130,000 women organized. And I said, wow, I mean, I had a microfinance program, be lucky to reach a few thousand people in the first year. How was this possible? And this started my revolution. It took my brain and rewired it from microcredit guy and through institutions to micro savings specialists with the idea that instead of creating huge institutions, you create thousands and thousands of little groups similar to this, and with the financial institution, basically that on its head. So let me just take you quickly through this odyssey. I'll start with my trips to Nepal. This is what I went down to the flatland Terai of Nepal and observed for the first time a savings group in operation. So here's the women, here's the financial institution, here's the box, they keep the money, they keep the records. And I said, this is absolutely amazing. And to me, it was amazing to see the empowerment, because I went to a brand new group, and the women stood up very timidly saying, my name is so-and-so. And a year later, they were answering questions right and left. Huge amount of empowerment occurring, and many of these women were organizing campaigns to stop the selling of girls to brothels, child marriages, spousal abuse, and the like. Really an incredible experience. So I started there with in Nepal, and here are the young women who are the secretaries of the groups, learning how to do record keeping. They had a few years of education, they could manage the books. And here's some of the kinds of businesses that they were starting. Interesting, when initially only 14% of the women were in business in Nepal in this program, and by the time I did the evaluation, that percentage had increased to about 70%. They were having their own source of income. This gave them independence from their husbands and others, and it was very empowering for them. So then I said, well, this is fascinating. So I was invited by Catholic Relief Services to go to India to look at the self-help group movement. This is the largest microfinance operation in the world, but the base of this is women and some men organized into groups of 20 or 30 that are reaching about 110 million poor Indians in that country, with a link to financial institutions, a link to banks. So I went in Orissa, talked to these women who are part of these groups, managing these groups, and learned tremendous amount, even more. Then I had the opportunity to go to Zimbabwe, which at that time in 2005 was just entering the era of hyperinflation. And inflation there was a paltry, at that time, 500% a year. And these savings groups were existing and spreading quickly. And you can see the gigantic pile of bills that she has in her hand. Each of these is 1,000 Zimbabwe dollars worth, a matter of a dime or a quarter or something like that at that time. And these groups were functioning because they were highly flexible, highly adaptable, and they could charge a very high interest rate. They had to charge a 40% interest rate every month just to keep even with inflation. And they were also doing other innovations like doing transactions in kind and using the Botswana pula or the South African rand as currencies well before any other institutions. So all the banks, microfinances, everything collapsed, and these groups were thriving. I thought it was fascinating. So here they were, and here they're keeping the records. And what's really interesting here in this area, so much HIV/AIDS, there was a height of the epidemic back in 2005. Children's groups, many of them orphans, AIDS orphans, were organizing the groups, doing little businesses, and able to make enough money so they could eat and go to school. As some of the groups took on, and here's the young record keeper, assiduously keeping and meticulously keeping the records for the group, and starting businesses, and also these groups, often took on a social function. And in this particular case, this one particular group had adopted these AIDS orphans that had, their parents had died, both had died of AIDS, they were taken care of by their grandparents, and that ensured them a little bit of money so they're able to eat and go on to school. So that was my background. I learned a tremendous amount from this experience, and it was a joyous experience as well. And as all of these areas, there's a lot of dancing and singing, solidarity, encouragement, excitement about taking development in their own hands. In fact, amazingly enough, there's a book I wrote on this topic called In Their Own Hands. And the basic message of this is that the best solutions are often from the people themselves. To ask people what they're doing, nudge along what they're already doing, be a catalyst, get the groups going, get out of the way, and have long-lasting benefits at a tiny fraction of the cost of any institutional alternative. I'll go into that in more detail. So now, we've gotten through the background. Welcome to Mali. Imagine you're in Mali. It's a little hard here because it's not 110 degrees. We're not sitting under a mango tree, but just as best you can, with the Harmattan winds of giant clouds of dust from the Sahara coming down. But imagine you're here. This girl's saying, welcome, here you are, and there we are in a savings group. These women, here's the bank right here, this little box right here. These 20 women will save money every week. In this case, we're probably saving usually 25 to 50 cents a week among themselves, making loans from this fund as the year went on, and then, as I'll show you in a moment, dividing this fund among themselves. So here's how it works. Here, imagine this is much more boring than that nice photo, but imagine here's the members of the group. They're saving that money and putting it into the central fund, the box. As the fund grows, week by week by week, people have needs for loans, to buy some food, to start a business, to buy a goat, whatever, and they take out loans from that group, for which they pay interest on, and then they pay back their loans, continue saving, the fund keeps growing week by week by week by week, and then at the end of the year, the fund is divided, and it's usually divided at a time in Mali, what's called the lean season, when the granaries run empty, the next harvest is months off, there's virtually no food, so they have all that money they save, plus their share of the interest income on the loans that are made, so that they're making a 20 or 30% return on their savings in a year, which is much higher than Bank of America, I think, which is, I think it's 1/4% or something like that. And the fascinating thing about this is that people, since the methodology is so simple, my motto is less is more, and the simpler the better, total local control, and these people here, one or two of these, the brightest lights would go off and form new groups. So there'd be a process, not only could you create these groups at very low cost, because you didn't have to train them, you didn't need to manage your funds, they would go off and self-replicate. So it's a virally self-replicating, extremely simple, locally based on process based on local traditions, completely adapted to the local culture that virally self-replicates and spreads by itself and survives under incredibly difficult conditions, which I will describe later as well. So how do you get it started? Well, the first thing is, in an African village, you need the permission of the chief. Now, this guy wasn't dressed when I came to the village, this guy was just dressed in cutoffs and a ragged shirt. He said, I want to take a picture. He said, oh, he shot into his, got on his chief's outfit. There he is, ready. So you need the permission of the chief and the village elders. And then, after permission has been given and the word has gone out to the village, the first group forms up, and this is formed by the staff of an NGO, a local NGO, who trains the first group in the village. And here she comes in. She's been trained by the Oxfam America Free from Hunger staff and how to run a group. And the interesting thing, she's identified. Let's say she goes back, identifies this woman here who's very interested, very excited, and she is going to be what we call the replicating agent, and she'll be trained to form all the other groups in this village. So over time, although one group is done by the trainer, this person will train 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more groups as a volunteer using a manual. And you can see this manual with pictures in it. We eliminated all the words since nobody can read or write, and made the process of forming the group is a series of pictures which could be easily followed. Okay, so and then the replicating agents, were all the women who were doing these groups, would get together from time to time, as here, and they would discuss to form their own solidarity among themselves and express, well, what worked, what didn't work, how did it work, and give themselves enough encouragement to go back out into their villages and form more groups. So they weren't isolated in doing this. So, and there's an enormous amount of inventiveness in here. So how do you keep records for thousands of village banks if virtually nobody has had the opportunity to learn how to read or write? Well, this woman has come up with a wonderful solution. She says, well, there's no calendars, there's nothing to read in this village. So how do I know when a year is up exactly? I said, oh, I've invented this great system. I have this little bag, and then every time that we finish a meeting, I put in a bag, and when we get up to 52, we divide up the fund. So, and then most of the innovation actually came from the villagers, the women, and then we spread this idea into more and more villages. That's how it worked there. And then how do you keep records? How do you know what the outstanding loan balance is if you can't read or write? It's because you want to know how much money you have. Most of the money is out in loans. Some of the money is in a box, but how much is that money in loans? So let's say if Eric has a $25 loan, he would hold up 2 sticks and a shea nut, roughly for $10 each, and a shea nut, and Jordan next to him would be the witness to see that Eric said what said was correct. So this whole system, oral record-keeping system, was put in place so that records should be kept, accurate records, because many of the women knew how to use money because they they often went to the markets. They knew how to count, and they're using this capacity to keep track of the performance of the group with no records. And at the end of the period, at the end of the year, the money was divided up. Then everybody got back every single cent they saved, plus a share of the interest, plus any fines for coming late to meetings or the like, and any collective projects the group might have put together. So, as I was saying, there was a big good chance of them having the money about 30 or 40% more than they saved at the time when everybody really needed it. And there was a lot of interest. Here we see these women are Bedouin group called the Fulani, and they were kind of around the edge of the group, kind of observing, what is this going on? And after that, I saw a partnership between the Bambara farmer women and these Fulanis who were herders, helping them form groups as well. All this process percolating out, spreading by itself, word of mouth through the markets and through girls going back to, after they're married and they're in their home villages, going back out to their home villages, spreading the word and spiraling this out. And I hope some of you are able to go back to Mali and document this process of replication, see what happened years after we formed the groups. So using this methodology, it formed in spirals. First of all, we had a couple of local partners, and they formed groups. This is all of Mali, but most of Mali is a desert, and this is the populated part of Mali. So the first 2 years, we did groups in all these red spots. Then we had a little bit more resources, and went from 2 NGOs to 7 NGOs, and new groups in the next 2 years were formed in yellow spots. And then we were able to get some funding from the Gates Foundation and up our team from 20 to 85 to 206, 18 teams of 10, and we were able to largely saturate the country, a populated part of the country, and able to ratchet this program up to 450,000 women organized in 6,000 villages, roughly 1/3 of all the villages in the country. And we said, well, okay, 206, that seems like a lot of staff to do this, and 85, but if Grameen or Ashe or Comportamos or all the microfinance programs you would have heard of were to do the same thing, to reach that same population, it would require a full-time permanent staff forever of 3,000. And all the interest on loans would have to be extracted out of these poor women to pay the operating costs of the institution. This way, you're a temporary catalyst, the program gets going, the groups function, and the amazing thing is these groups continue to survive in the face of a coup and major insurgency from the north, where you may have heard of in Mali. The French army went in a few years ago. Massive drought. That's why I call this the cockroach model of microfinance, because there's no way of killing it. It's also the amoeba model of microfinance, because all of the DNA, everything it takes to run this group, is contained within all the knowledge necessary, contained within the group, including that, remember your biology class, that pseudopod going off, the replication is all there. And if there's any problems and a few groups die off, well, there's still many more, and the process continues. So it's like any single cell organism, it's highly resilient. So, oops. And then interesting things started happening, not because of our intervention at Oxfam, but from the women themselves. So the first thing they started to do was to train their girls, their adolescent daughters, before they were married off, to form their own groups. So maybe they could take these ideas, they could be a year or 2 in their group, and then take these ideas off to their home villages. So there's one. And another thing they said, well, this is, since now they have money, they were able to buy up grain, maize, millet, and the like, peanuts, when the prices were relatively low, and they were able to resell this at a profit or use this to survive through the hungry season, the area where they had to, the lean season where they had to cut back on their food for often months a year. Of course, many women started businesses, and you can't really see this, but these little yellow signs here are for International Women's Day. It was another angle. They had never realized there was a day for women, but this was another rallying cry for them. And we're about to be able to buy fixed assets, these walking ATM machines, because a goat can have kids. That's a business. You can sell a goat when you need cash, or you can eat it. So it's a highly usable form of. And one of the random control trial study done on this showed that in the villages with these programs, although there was really only about 40% of the eligible women had joined groups, there was a village-wide decrease in chronic hunger and building assets, building savings, as well as the replication of this model into the control villages from the random control trial study, and growing social capital. And the women also did collective projects such as this, gardening. And then, so with that success, we took the model to Cambodia. And here I was introducing this, not that I could speak the thing, but I was there and talking about this methodology, and the villagers were looking on. And here we are, the program is ratcheting up, and this gentleman is teaching this secretary how to keep the records. They were more literate there, so we could use record. And we took the methodology onto El Salvador, and here this woman is teaching this woman how to keep the records. Interestingly enough, most of our promotoras in El Salvador were ex-guerrilleros, ex-guerrilla fighters, and had fought on the left-wing side. And there were these people had enormous stature and status in the community, and they were seen as leaders, and they were able to convince the women to take the risk of forming these savings groups. And here we took the methodology off to Guatemala, also in another area that was affected by the U.S. Unfortunately, U.S. promoted war in that country, and many thousands of deaths. But they picked up on this methodology as well with many of the women, which I'll show you, taking out loans. She just got a loan. She's very happy. Maybe next week she has to start repaying it. Not so happy, but there you go. And this woman here was able to organize all the Saving for Change groups in the area of Alta Verapaz, which is one of a province, and enabled them to, by organizing them, to have a slate and elect many women mayors for the first time in this region of the country. So they have, once you have an organized platform where people have to come week by week, all sorts of other things become possible. So what we have learned from this process, which revolutionized my thinking, was, amazingly enough, we also said, and it was always kind of an anomaly, when I was doing microcredit, well, the poor are too poor to save, but amazingly enough, they were not too poor to take on a loan and debt. Oh, that seems kind of strange when you think about it, but they save. Even the poorest can save. Amazingly enough, in a group of 20, there's enough capital to take care of most of the short-term needs of the members. That's because only 3 or 4 out of the 20, or 5 or 6, at any one time will be needing a loan. The groups can quickly manage themselves. We strip down the methodology. Spontaneous replication, going as this model is very common. You don't need a highly sophisticated organization with great financial systems. Any NGO doing agriculture or health can run this program. Costs are extremely low, a tiny fraction of maybe 1/10 to 1/20th of the price of an institution doing this work, financial institution. Impact is social as well as economic. And the groups, as I said before, survive extremely resilient in the face of really difficult conditions. Now, I've been recently assessing a program in the Dominican Republic, República Dominicana, and here there's one of the biggest development efforts over the last decades is conditional cash transfer programs. There's about 500 million people receiving small payments from the government. Through the structures created by these programs, by using the same staff of the government, we're introducing savings groups within those groups, and they're able to mobilize savings equivalent to about half of the value of their cash transfers very quickly. And this could be a way of greatly magnifying the impact of these programs around the world. So we're trying to document that methodology. And this is not all just a grim process. It's a lot of fun. Remember the dancing from Zimbabwe, here, there, and Mali. And now, Eric made reference to, and the great success of how many joined today? 16. We're bringing this methodology to the United States. And would you like to talk just a little more about that, Eric?
Yeah.
So Eric, he's the guy. He's the one doing this. And this is the first savings groups that have been created in America. So tell a little bit about, give a little background on it.
Yeah, so my background was in credit unions, and when I started doing the work in Mexico and talking to the people there and using his application methods of research and then the methodology of the savings groups, I learned more about our own country and the people at the bottom of the pyramid on how they manage their money. than I knew in 20 years of being in the industry. And it occurred to me that after having success using his exact methodology in Central America and in Mexico, that there would be high potential of using that methodology here in the US. And since I'm in Des Moines, why not in Des Moines? So we started groups in actually June with South Sudanese refugees. We tested it out. We wanted to test out the methodology with these groups to see how well it would work. These individuals are partially banked and partially underbanked, and some of them are completely unbanked. Methodology worked extremely well. We have one group of 6 South Sudanese refugees. They've saved $2,500 in about 4 months. They've used that $2,500 to grant their group members $4,500 in loans, in 14 loans. That's the reusing that same dollar that they don't have to use or access from another financial institution, and the interest that they paid on their loans, as Jeffrey said, went back into their pot. So their value is growing. They're earning about 17% interest, and by the time the payout occurs on November 20th, we imagine it'll be a little over 20% interest. Much higher, like he said.
Yeah.
So we see success. So when you see success in a pilot, we're expanding that out to other refugee populations through organizations like Lutheran Services in Iowa, right across the street, and Oak Ridge Neighborhood, and the United States Committee on Refugees and Immigrants. And we've got a Burundi group that will start in a week and a half, the Farmers Market group from LSI, and then the Bhutanese group, and probably more groups after that.
Great.
And we don't see a reason why this couldn't replicate itself throughout the U.S. That's why individual here, Jordan, he's from Boulder, Colorado, does savings groups in Mexico as well. And we're examining the feasibility of applying this methodology here in the U.S. with immigrant and refugee populations.
So the next step, Colorado. Jordan Bailey. And it's philanthropies is a great name. So, I'll skip. Well, anyway, so we want to launch this program as Eric was, and hopefully Jason will be doing this in Colorado over the next months, and I'll be doing this off in the north. I come from Cambridge, and we hope to be working with Latino communities up there. So anyway, I was there, and also, just so you know, I've been doing this for a long time. So this is a picture of me. Now Jordan and I have something in common. We were both Peace Corps volunteers. We cut our teeth in development as Peace Corps volunteers in Ecuador. He did about 2 generations later than I did, but and not. And this is me coming out of the jungle after 4 days mucking around doing a colonization project. Right, and so I was a mere about your age, well, maybe a little bit young, maybe a little older. I think I was 25 at the time, and that's where I looked, how I looked, and let me just tell you a little bit more. And so I'd like to conclude with this wonderful thing. Obama now has a 52% approval rating, and Mali, his approval rating is well over 99%, and the women are there. It's this, I like to say, is change you can believe in. And it says right here, Obama, change you can believe in. And everybody's walking around with these great Obama posters on their back. And so, I wonder now, if you're not bored as much as this little girl here, if you would like to ask some questions. And this gentleman right here.
What happens if somebody defaults?
In the savings groups.
Yes.
There are sometimes small problems of default. Generally, most all the loans are brought up to date. They might be a little bit late, they have to pay a fine, but by the time the fund is divided, virtually all the time that the groups can resolve that problem. Now there's a few examples and groups have lost, but it's very, very small. The repayment rate is actually quite a bit higher than in microfinance because the group of 20 observes all of the transactions and also approves and reviews all the loan requests. So it's to everybody's advantage to. It's the difference between what Stuart Rutherford calls cold money, our money. You know, these rich foreigners coming in and providing loan funds, and warm money. This is their own cash, And so anybody that doesn't pay up is affects the entire group. And in a closed system like this, as somebody described it and it used the term of social suicide within the community, you'd be greatly ostracized. Yes?
Okay, so how do they prevent someone from just watching over the money from just taking money out of the fund? It seems like a pretty corruptible system.
Well, amazingly enough, it's much, much less corrupt than microfinance, because we've dealt with many issues of the ghost loans, the ghost groups, and so the money, as I said, all the transactions are done in front of everybody. Money's collected. If you open the box, you count the money, and it had to be the same as the week before. You see that no money came out. People save. They pay any fines for late payments or not attending meetings on time. Any loan payments, loan interest payments, add all that money together, and they say, well, who wants a loan? And then the money goes out in the form of loans, usually 1 month, 2 months, 3 months reviewed, and comes back. So it is a concern, and I'm glad both of you brought these up, but amazing, I have done 20 years of microfinance to recognize that the levels of corruption are like much less in these groups than in typical microfinance operations.
You mentioned a couple, the dual locks, triple locks.
Oh yeah, well, okay, since you brought it up. The box is locked, and there's one officer called the box keeper, and it has 3 locks on it. Then there's 3 keys kept by other people, so to avoid collusion. So, and none of these box keepers and the key keepers are the president, secretary, and treasurer of the group. So this is all managed. The group is managed. There's bylaws. There's elected officers that keep, and these are trained and supervised by outside staff people until the groups can function on their own after about a year. Yes.
The photos you showed indicate that the groups are composed solely of women. Are men allowed to join? Are there groups of men? How do the men react?
I'm glad you brought that up. On our particular program from Oxfam America, and the program I looked at, it's called the Women's Empowerment Program in Nepal, these are women's programs, and it was our intent to give women all the opportunities to assume leadership positions and talk about their own issues. So it was a conscious decision. But worldwide, the groups are often mixed, and there's usually a ratio of about 80% women and 20% men on average across the board. But usually, the few men assume all the leadership positions, really leaving the women out. That's why we made the conscious decision of having the groups be of women, so they would learn the leadership skills that they. So it was a methodological decision that we made. Although we suggested to the women in our Mali program, well, how about some men's groups? And they said, men be in these groups, hold each other, and they all usually started laughing. And said, are you kidding? But men have, in our Cambodia program, the groups were mixed, men and women, and it worked quite well in that cultural context. Other questions? Yes?
So it sounds like these savings groups are really based in a group society. So like you said, the social suicide of defaulting and things like that. And so when implementing these programs in the United States or maybe cultures where it's based on the individual, what sort of challenges do you guys foresee?
Well, you're absolutely right. And like Eric would attest, and so would I, that it would be very difficult. We think these kind of programs will work extremely well in immigrant and refugee populations because they're bringing with them I didn't go into this, but in all these traditions, there's a tradition of revolving group savings in which let's say 10 of you would come together. In fact, I just was in a hotel and I talked to a woman who organized one of these groups. 10 women come together. They each save $100 a week, which means that it's $100 and not spending a little bit here or there. put it, and they get $1,000 payout in turn. So you'd get $1,000 until you go all the way around the circle. We can build on that tradition, which is very prevalent in refugee communities. I'd make a point of every time I get in a taxi or going to a hotel of asking if people are organized in this way. And I think you can leverage that tradition of rotating savings groups and add on to, as Eric is doing, the savings group system, which is really creating, in that revolving system, a mini bank out of that, so that people can take out loans when they want, and the amount they want, interest payments, make the fund grow larger. There's more safeguards with a box with locks and elected officers and bylaws. And so we're trying to, but I think we'll find that it's, we have to start from that base, that organized base. So even here, I think we'll find it. And in fact, as I've been doing research in New York City and up in Lawrence, Massachusetts, Lowell, Massachusetts, with different immigrant groups, we're finding that there's probably a vast, informal, invisible system of operating alive and well in this country, of groups, small groups of 5, 10, 15 people coming together and saving money. I'll just give one example from one of my students from Nepal. She was in what the name for this revolving group in Nepal is called a Dikuti. And there's 20 members of this Dikuti, and they put in $1,000 every month, and it's a group of 20. And with a $20,000 payment, this one person gets a payment, and they start a restaurant. The next one buys a food stand. The next one does a down payment on a house. The next one buys a delivery van. The next one, and in her case, she paid a lot of her tuition to go to Columbia based on this group. So we want to tap into this already existing, thriving, informal, invisible economy, which is churning around, completely oblivious to all of us until you ask and start probing around. Okay. Yes.
So,
Go
pardon
ahead.
me, is that all right? So one problem with microfinance is that people don't generally have financial services once they graduate from the small scale loans.
Right.
And this tends to give rise to kind of this plethora of small scale businesses that cease to grow at some point.
Right.
And I guess my question is, do savings groups offer any solution to that problem?
No, not at all. There's been a lot of criticism there. One of the most articulate, no, I don't know how articulate it is, but certainly most vociferous critics is a guy by Milford Bateman. And he makes a very good point. I worked in Bosnia. That's again just about a month after they stopped shooting each other. I was asked to go there to start a microfinance program. Everybody was dressed in armored vests and helmets, and I said, well, I'm set. I got my Swiss Army knife, so I was out there, and so we did a microcredit program. But he's very right. What should have come into a country like Bosnia was more like a Marshall Plan to develop small, because people already had the skills to do bigger businesses. And you're absolutely right. The tendency was called the infantilization of the economy. It's all sorts of little petty trading things when what's really needed is small and medium businesses, which requires an entirely different and much more sophisticated approach. Because microcredit and micro savings you can do is kind of a cookie cutter approach. That actually requires much more sophisticated knowledge. And we've been saying this for the last 30 years, and virtually nobody's really cracked the nut about how to do that effectively. It's certainly a huge need. And certainly nobody, most of the people in savings groups will mitigate poverty. They'll be hungry less, they'll eat better, there'll be less stunting, they'll develop their social capital, they'll have more of a cushion against life's adversities, but they'll be at that level, a little bit better, but not moving beyond it. So you can't exaggerate the impact.
Great.
Sure, yes,
I'd love
please.
to add something to that, because
Yeah.
this was one of the surprising things that I had. Because when I started the project, which was an independent study here at Drake, actually, of research, all the academic professionals told me that microfinance was going to be the solution for the people working around the dump. And so when I went down there, the very first set of questions that I asked, 3 different groups, was about what kind of job do you envision having? What's your dream job? And about 5 or 6 questions in, I asked, would you like to start a business? You know, and I'm thinking, I got microfinance in the back of my head, this is going to be the solution. 20% of the women raised their hand. I thought, well, shit, that's not going to work. Because microfinance is designed for small business development, right? Now, how many in here own their own business? How many of you work for... Yeah. Typically, and when you get out of school, most people are going to work for somebody else. Why? It's a little bit more stable. You got a set of hours, you got a set paycheck, you don't have to worry about bankruptcy or about going out of business, especially in an informal economy when there really isn't bankruptcy protection. And that's actually one of the big learning points that I had, was that not everybody who's at the bottom of the pyramid, the solution is start your own business.
They want a job.
Right, exactly. And then somebody else pointed out, Jason Dickel, I think his name is, from Great Britain, you start a business on a street where people are earning $1 a day, what's your customer base look like? $1 a day customers, they don't have much to spend. You're going to go out of business pretty quickly. So that was sort of one of the things, but savings groups are not necessarily designed for small business. For the 20% that do, they can leverage that deposit that comes out for a down payment or whatever income producing asset they want for their small business. But most people use it for consumption purposes. These loans that are taken out and paid back in a month, it's just income smoothing, you know. So, but it is a good point. I mean, there is a point at which, how do you use these savings groups to transition them into formal financial structures? And you know, my background in thinking, you know, a lot of credit unions don't even know these things exist, or banks. But they do have tools that these payouts from the savings group can integrate into, like a savings secured loan. So you take that payout of $1,000, put it into the bank or credit union and get yourself a loan. Oh, you think, well, what good is that? You're just swapping money. Yeah, but you're swapping money, if you choose, and building credit in the meantime. And so you can use that then credit history to move into more of a formal financial institution sector, if you want to.
And if you have a better credit score, then you move away from predatory lenders like payday loans and title loans and check cashers, and move up to the possibility of getting less exploitative services from banks. Of course, the richer you are, the better your bank services, to say the least. Yes?
You know, 2 other examples of savings groups. One would be, for example, in Mexico. I lived in Mexico 6 years. I know people who have done this. They'll pull money, and they'll use that money to pay what's necessary to get across. Right. It's just easy to make 1,000. Yeah. Then that person's across. Then they make that 1,000, and they return that 1,000 and another 1,000 to get the next person across.
Right.
And then they, you know, it's just moving like this, and it's family members and close relations, and there's no way that somebody is not going to come through. I mean, because trust is paramount, you know, among them. So, I mean, that's an idea of cooperation, and that's been going on decades, since the 20s. And then another example that I know a family in Texas, but that's where I'm originally from. The father and the mother helped the oldest child get through college. This was way back when college was much more affordable.
Right.
So they helped him, and then he helps his next sibling.
Right.
And you know, they stair-step it like that and pass responsibility. So the idea of savings groups and cooperation, you know, has a basis in a lot of things that people have been doing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a really great example of the sort of stair-stepping back and forth, bringing the money back. And
yeah, and it just requires trust and planning and effort. Of course, there's risk. Somebody could, you know, pass away or whatever else, but that's a risk that people incur.
Great. Thank you. More questions? Yes?
How large do these informal groups get?
Well, some of them got large, the usual optimum size is around 20, 25. I've seen groups much bigger than that. The more sophisticated, they kind of break into subgroups. But virtually, in the average in Mali, Senegal, is around 24. And in Latin America, when we worked in El Salvador and Guatemala, it's around 15, 16 members each. That seems to be pretty standard. It's enough to bring together people you trust and run through all the transactions in a reasonable amount of time without taking too much time. And without, the groups get bigger than that, then they kind of bog down on the time that it takes to do the transactions. and the lack of transparency that occurs. So I've just been impressed about, I just learned something about these informal rotating savings circles, often called in Mexico, called a tanda. The woman said, well, I organize it, but we don't know a person really, really well. We put them in as the 9th and 10th person to receive a payment. That means that they have to put money in all the time, so we're not sure they're going to escape or not. So everybody, there's a story about every group, every formal group, savings group, and every informal rotating group of assessing people. And I like, everybody talks about their algorithms. This is the great thing today, but I think the most complex algorithm existing is how we size each other up. Thousands of variables to figure out who's trustworthy, who's not, and who to include, who not to, and how to move this along. Tremendous creativity and inventiveness. As I look at these informal savings circles, every single one teaches me something different about how some really smart, intelligent person came in and figured something out. So that's why I think that all of us development professionals should not be in our ivory towers and cook up schemes for the poor, but spend time going in and just asking how they're already solving their problems, understand that, and perhaps doing nothing. That would probably be the greatest thing. But if you're doing anything at all, at least nudge along what's already in place, and be careful not to destroy an already functioning system. The more years I've been in development, the more I realize that in your own hands is the only way to go. That's because, and the ultimate example, the opposite is Jeffrey Sachs' Millennium Villages, where all sorts of schemes are cooked up in New York City and jammed down the throats of unsuspecting villagers in the rural areas and of these Millennium Villages. The cost for Millennium Village is hundreds of dollars per person. And we can introduce a savings methodology to an entire village of 1,000 for about $1,000, $1 a person, and see community-wide impact. And with a high expectation that these benefits will be sustained because they're at their level, they're nudging along what's already in process and not doing drastic changes. Often these bright ideas that we have are not bright at all and don't fit into the local context.
So what's interesting to me though is as you were saying, that these communal mechanisms for building resiliency into these economies and these communities in most places they already exist, and you mentioned a few examples, and
right.
My guess is that even beyond savings that we would find many other manifestations of this thing where, so then the question is, you have a particular model. If you're going in and introducing, this particular model, a savings group, what happens to all of the pre-existing mechanisms that people have used, traditionally? Do they get displaced or somehow disrupted as people adjust to this externally?
Great question. Great question. Well, according to the research we've done, that those who are already in traditional savings groups within the context of African communities are usually just a little bit better off because they're usually women vendors and markets, and they have more cash and a regular source of cash so they can keep paying regularly into it. But we found that when we introduce savings groups, the actual number of people involved in collective savings doubles roughly because they find this more flexible savings group model more attractive. Then your second question is that those who tend to be slightly better off will still keep their traditional rotating, what we call a tontine in the context there, and their savings groups, and others will just be in the savings groups or were once in a tontine and now prefer their savings groups. So, but the most dramatic case of this is in the Dominican Republic, where everybody understands how the sun system, the rotating system works, but there's really only not very many people in these groups are part of this at all. And so they are now, maybe 20% were saving in groups before, and the rest were spending a lot of money on lottery and other small things, and they've been able to benefit from these savings groups as an alternative. Well, it's a great question. It's one that big question we've addressed, because you don't want to go in and destroy something that's already functioning in place, which is the fate of so many development efforts. Collateral damage is a huge issue in the whole development scene. Other questions? Okay.
Well, I want
I've
to
exhausted this.
I
Yes.
want to thank you, Jeffrey, and also Eric for bringing this to us. And Eric, if folks want to learn more about, what you're doing here in Des Moines, do you have a web page or someplace that?
Yeah, of course, we got a fantastic Facebook page you can visit. We have informational materials out front as well. You can read up on some of our groups in Mexico and groups here as well. We're very active and always looking for people to come along for the ride. It's going to get big.
And Jeffrey Ashe's book is available for purchase. So thank all of you for coming, and
Yeah.
thank you.
I'll be up there and I'll even sign it for you.
Sign it.